greatest Renaissance men, really who he was defined as supreme architect, town planner, prodigious scholar, an extremely acute art theorist, mathematician, painter, archaeologist, physicist, chemist, and musician. Really, this was the typical Renaissance man, people who excel really in all the subjects. But what was most interesting of this, I was doing other research, not looking in this case for leather, but really something drew my attention, and it was one of his works that was posthumously published about 100 years after his death. And in one of these books, he made a very interesting definition when discussing on what art and what science is. And in this paper, there is a discussion between Jupiter and Socrates. In the Renaissance, when these scholars tried to explain certain concepts, they used the dialogue between, in this case, the creator, Jupiter, and Socrates, the philosopher. And, well, this is a translation of these fragments. Come here, O master, and tell me if there is in your imagination the desire of making a pair of good shoes. Want to think that you need to make them to have a leather that is perfect? I think I need, he said. Socrates, then, would you take to make them any piece of leather which may come to your hands, or will you judge it being well selected among the many you could have, one that you consider the best? Will judge, he said, that it is a well-selected one. Socrates, then, in which way, he said, would you know that that piece of leather is good? Want to compare it to others which by experience will seem to you the best choice and appropriate to your purpose? By making comparison and similarity, so that you will examine well this yours and know what is missing to this and to the other, and what this other may have better? Would compare them, he said. Socrates, then, and whoever did that leather, which is excellent, would you believe he made it randomly, or even with science he has been able to make that this leather has no defect? I believe, answered the creator, that this was science. And which science, Socrates said, was the one allowing him to make it? Maybe what he acquired through the use and through the experience of leather making. I would believe that one, said the creator. Maybe, said Socrates, as you serve yourself of comparisons and similarities to select it, also the tanner to make it would have served himself of comparisons and similarities, comparing the parts to the parts and the whole to the whole, until the leather which he was to make would correspond in every detail to the perfection of that leather which he had in memory or kept in mind willing to do. Thank you. What is most interesting of this is it was written in about 1460.
Thank you, Gustav.
Thank you.
Now for the afternoon series of lectures. The first one is on biocide regulation and the implications for the leather industry. This is a joint combination from Buckman Laboratories. Ralph Lehman is the first speaker, followed by Elton Hurlow. Round of applause for Mr. Ralph.
Thank you, David, for the nice introduction. Indeed, Buckman wants to thank the SLTC organization that we can bring an update on European biocide regulation for this group. I'm glad that there are also students here in the auditorium, so that indeed they are also informed by the fact that you are busy with the leather making but that you have to watch also out what they are deciding upon us in Brussels and how that we have to deal with that and react on that. So I will take this Biocide regulation part on my side, because since 2005, I'm the regulatory affairs manager there, and the implication for the leather industry, I think that can better be presented by Elton Hurlow, who is our global market development manager, who is quite so many years already in the field. Now, let's be honest, I also think he didn't want to do the boring stuff in the regulations themselves, so that's the reason why I'm also attending this. Now, I want to guarantee you, just after lunch, talking about regulation, I do not want everybody to fall into sleep. I have made it as practical as possible. Now, I'm already since 2005 regulatory affairs manager, but already more than 20 years of experience in regulatory affairs. And I was thinking to the presentation of Mr. Gilmore this morning, I think it also has to do with passion, I think. I evolved from practical dossiers formation and then finally in a manager's role. But it really, at a given moment, somebody was saying, yeah, you must be mad for doing this job. I said, I'm not, but it certainly would help a bit. Now, if you talk about the last 20 years, if I'm looking at, how could I really show in a picture what oh, sorry, I'm putting the wrong button. I will use the answer again. I present it as a jungle full of legislations. And what we have been seeing, also being Europe now, that we have a lot of directives, regulations imposed and of course by Europe, but we still have local legislation. And Mr. Gilmore also touched on the ones here in UK. We have beside that also the REACH regulation and the new classification and labeling, but we are going to focus here on the Biocide product directive and regulation. You see that van, because you have these obstacles with respect to legislation, I have luckily 4 people, and you see 4 people around, who are pushing indeed the van in the right direction. Of course, being manager, I have the advantage to be at the steering wheel. Now, when we talk about European regulation, it really started already in 1998, so that's quite some years ago already, and this entered into force in 14 May of 2000. Now, what the European Commission wanted to establish was that really there would be a harmonized approach in dealing with the authorization and the placing on the market of biocide products and their use within each and every member state. And the underlying goal was also that they wanted to keep a high level of protection European-wide for human exposure and exposure to environment through a real proper risk assessment. And Elton will talk about how we have to see this risk assessment later on. Now, the Biocide Product Directive was also stipulating already 23 product types. And if you really look here within the group of leather manufacturers, there were 2 important product types to be considered. Be it product type 9, which was really related to preservatives for leather, and leather is specifically mentioned in the directive. But we have seen, due to national legislation which already existed before that introduction of the BPD, like the Netherlands, where they have made decision and said that, for example, the soaking, where you have a lot of water, so processed waters, that when you use a bactericide, you have to consider this under PT 11, product type 11. So it was very important here. We had this milestone of 14 May 2000. Now, as of this date, chemical suppliers knew very well in which way to go for authorizing their products. But yeah, of course, the Commission could not neglect the fact that you have hundreds of active substances already on the European market for diverse applications. That Buckman is also in pulp and paper, water treatment. So these had all to be considered and to be evaluated. So what the Commission came up with, that besides this new path forward, there was also a review program for existing active substances. And so they listed this in priority listings. And you had a 4th priority list, which was dealing really with those product type 9s, 11. So really, our dossiers, the Biocide product dossiers, for leather, were submitted by October 2008. Buckman did that for all the relevant active substances which were related to the leather industry, also in order to guarantee the continuation of those products into the market. And also, of course, other chemical suppliers, maybe sitting here in the room, needed to do that also for their appropriate active substances. Now, just for giving you an idea what meant that for a company like Buckman in order to consider which way to go. If you look at the Biocide product dossier, they want to gather data studies on different parts. You have the phys-chem data, you have toxicology, and everything related to environment, so environmental fate and ecotoxicology. And if you look at those prices from studies you need to perform in order to get your dossier complete, and then you're only talking about paperwork, then, and the tests related to that, we easily sum up to several million euros when you would need to start from scratch. See also the regulatory affairs part there that's related to fees, because of course when we need to introduce the dossier, the competent authority need to evaluate that. They have need resources for this, so they need money, and they are imposing quite some high fees. You have also consultancy we are using, because we do not have always the expertise in-house. But I do not want to give you the misunderstanding that this has nothing to do with my wage. I'm not earning this money with Buckman, that's for sure. Now, if we're looking where we are at this moment, since 1998 to 2000, the implementation, and being in the latter phase of introduction of BPD dossiers, the list of approved active substances is still empty, so they are still under review. They really had not understood the fact and the work which was behind that for the whole evaluation. The only actives which are now on this list are the ones from the first priority list, so we have 4. And the first are related to weed preservation and rodenticides. So by the fact that they were running behind, they needed to rethink the process, and the European Commission came with a clever idea, between brackets, to reintroduce a new text, new legislation, piece of legislation, and that's the regulation. And the Biocide Products Regulation is something we need to consider now. It has already been published last year in the European Official Journal and will be implemented as of 1st of September 2013. Write down this date because it's also for the Thames a very important date to maintain. You have here the regulation. The difference with a directive is that the Commission wanted the regulation just like REACH. They had seen the example like REACH. And the advantage it gives here is really that the legislation is immediately being implemented in all 27 member states. They are maintaining the principle of a 2-tier authorization procedure. That means that they really are looking first to the active substance, get it on the list, and once that's on the list, you need also to authorize your Biocide products. As the BPD, the Biocide Products Directive, review program was not finished, they have taken this over in this new regulation. So, as I said, the review program is running very late. Now, with respect to the new regulation, I just want to pick out 2 important elements for the tanners. The main difference, and that was really a disadvantage within industry, and certainly for chemical suppliers, was that in the Biocide Product Directive there was no clear reference to a Biocide active and the company, the official applicant who had submitted this dossier. That meant that for a certain case, it could be that there was only one applicant and a lot of other companies could simply relate on that one notification. Now with this new nominative listing, you will have a list of all official sources of active substances which can be used. And this really again will occur as of September 1st, 2013. So write that down. For example, for the fungicide TCM2B, which is very well known in best available technology also within the leather industry, Buckman has submitted this, and you will see on the list that TCM2B will be clearly linked to Buckman as, at this moment, the only official participant. Now, of course, such regulation should also give the opportunity to other sources indeed to join the process, and therefore they have 2 years' time. So, but note very clear that as of September 1st, 2015, if a Biocide product is not containing an active substance, which is on the official source, you cannot use that anymore. So talk with your supplier on this. And with this, indeed, industry was very happy that the concept of free rider will be ended at that moment. That means that even the other sources will need to do the same kind of effort and costs related to such dossiers. Another important concept was the concept of treated articles, which was not in the Biocide Product Directive. And with respect to that, that's the only definition I've taken out of the BPR. That means that a treated article means any substances, mixture, or article which has been treated with or intentionally incorporates one or more biosoluble products. And with article, you have every type of articles, and it's also a bit related to the REACH. But for leather, this translates this in the following, that leather articles will not have the possibility anymore to be put on the market unless they are really treated with biosoluble products which contain active substances which you will find back, or you need to find back, on the approved union list with official sources. Now, what is the biggest impact here is the import of wet blue leather as general, but so that means wet blue finished leather and leather articles in Europe treated outside of the EU. So it was really the general principle that the Commission wanted to bring over, that for imported articles, if it had been treated outside of the EU, that indeed approved active substances should be used. So that's really a big impact. It is also likely that certain labelling requirements will be linked to that. That means that, for example, wet blue, which has been treated in Brazil, comes into Europe, that with the wet blue you will need to have also a labelling requirement in which it's stated, if it's treated, that it's treated with the appropriate approved active substances. As treated articles are now new within the biosoluble product regulation, there is certain transitional period of time, transitional measures. That means that there can already be the case that there was already imported leather or leather articles which were treated outside of the EU with non-regulated European active substances. So they want to give the possibility in order to set that straight, and therefore treated articles which were already on the market on September 1st, 2013, they can remain on the market on the clear condition that an application, so a full dossier, will be submitted at latest by September 1st, 2016. We have within Buckman a special case where we have a new developed molecule chat, which have been used outside of the EU. But of course, in order to guarantee that we can import such treated leather, Buckman has already made the steps in order to get such dossier ready by the guideline. But meanwhile, we can remain on the market. Now, as I said, for finalizing, and before handing the floor to Elton, I want to say and inform you that this treated article concept, the guidance, is still under a lively debate at the European Commission competent authority meetings. I'm a member of the management committee of the European Biosoluble Product Forum at CEFIC, that's the European Chemical Federation, and they are located in Brussels. And as Buckman is located in Ghent, it's very near to Brussels. So I'm spending a lot of my time now also in Brussels to follow up on those discussions. And in this way, Buckman, but also industry, get first out-of-hand information on how these things are evolving and how they want to really implement that in from the regulation itself, and how they are going to use that. So we also liaise very strongly with confederations like COTANS, in order that things, if it's related to leather industry, that this can be put forward. Okay. And with this, I would hand over the floor to Elton.
Clearly, we're privileged to have someone like Barak steer our core molecules through this jungle of regulation, but it's also good for the industry because of his contacts at European level. He can make sure that our industry is not disadvantaged. What we'll do now is I'll try and look in the crystal ball and try and give you some idea from my feeling as to what some of this regulation will mean for tanners and for our audience. But let's go back first and talk a little bit about microorganisms, and then we'll look at the typical agents used to control them. You may be familiar, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the organisms that damage leather. Probably in the last 20 years, based on genetic information we have on genetic sequence, we now talk about the 3 domains of living organisms. And in the leather industry, all 3 are represented. The archaea, which we find on salted or brine-cured hides. are a problem, typically known in the industry as red heat. And then bacteria. From time of slaughter, the natural body defense mechanisms break down, and bacteria are a problem through short-term preservation, soaking, up until the leather is tanned. And then once it's tanned, obviously fungus can grow. It grows predominantly on the fat that's present in the leather. So it's a problem for wet glue, for crust, wet crust, or even finished leather if it contains sufficient moisture. And the chemistries that we use, bactericides, are effective against archaea and bacteria. Fungicides is what we use to control fungi. And tanneries will also use sanitizers, disinfectants, terminology for more broad spectrum chemistries that will control living organisms. Now I'm not going to go through the slide in detail. You're familiar with looseness, with grain damage, with staining, and in the management time and costs associated with damage from microorganisms. And that's why we need to use microbicides. Now what I've done here is based on my experience of what is being sold or what is being promoted for use in the tannery, taken a look at the information that is out there, it's publicly available on informative documents as to what has been notified for registration under the BPD and now the BPR. And looking at product types 9 and 11, the salts of methyl and dimethyl dithiocarbamates, and this is a class of compound. That's the most commonly used soaking bactericide. Those are notified as well, and I don't see that much here in Europe, but around the world, mixtures of methyl isothiazolines and 4,5-dichloromethylizothiazolines are also used in soaking, and those are also notified under PT 911. Then we look at other areas, especially in the United States with the brine curing, the benzisothiazolin, the BIT, and the biguanides sometimes used. Bronopol has been suggested for leather industry. I'm not aware of much commercial activity on that. Perthiones, I mentioned those. Here they have bactericidal activity. They're also fungicidal as well, though. And they're also listed, as are the sanitizers, the quats, quaternary ammonium compounds. They're useful for just general control of especially bacteria. And then the oxidizers, peroxide, chloride, hypochlorite. And when I look at what is used, this pretty much covers most of what is used commercially in the leather industry. So it looks like we're covered. Let's move on now to the fungicides. The most widely used fungicide in the world is TCMTB, and that's the structure there. In fact, it's the only fungicide that's used on its own for long-term preservation of wet glue. It's cost-effective, works well, and an estimate is that about 85% of leathers, if you take them randomly and analyze them, you will find that active in the leathers. OIT, which is the structure here, is also a very good fungicide, and it works well in combination with a number of the other actives used in the leather industry. And then we have the parachlorometacresol and OPP, the phenolic compounds, which you also find being used commercially worldwide. And in green we have CHED, and this is the CHED molecule here. This is the only molecule in the last 30 years that has been specifically developed for the leather industry. And we've introduced that into selected markets about 2 years ago. And it also works very well synergistically with other industry actives. Now I've listed here the diiodo-paramethyltoluylsulfone, the DIMTS, the iodopropenyl-butyl carbamate, the structure here, IPBC, carbendazim, and propiconazole. There is promotion of these products for leather industry, but I must be quite honest, I really don't see too much commercial traction with those products. They are supported under the BPR and BPD, but from a commercially important point of view, those 5 actives, I'll throw out a number, 95%, but I think it's probably more like 98, 99% of leathers made commercially are preserved with those actives. And those are all supported under either the BPD or CHED, because it was only developed 2 years ago, under the transitional measures of the BPR is being supported as well. Okay, I'm going to change gears a little now and talk about regulations and also restrictions, because as a tanner, you'll probably find that NGO, non-government organization restrictions are probably more of a have more of an impact on your day-to-day business than the actual regulations. But let's start off talking about toxicology and risk, and then we'll talk about consumer concerns of microorganism controlled substances in leathers. So let's talk about toxicity, hazard, and assessment of risk. And I think in a tradition, it seems to be a theme of today. I'm going to go back 500 years. There was a Swiss-German doctor called Paracelsus, and he made the famous statement, there are no poisons, only poisonous doses. And this, I think, is something we need to keep in mind today. Paracelsus is considered the father of toxicology, and a lot of the basic principles are captured, of toxicology are captured in that thought, only poisonous doses. This picture on the bottom is of the deadly nightshade, Atropina belladonna, which is a garden plant. And this plant can be a medicine, it can be a cosmetic, it can be a poison. It's being used as an anesthetic, and some of the modern drugs have very similar structure to the deadly nightshade. Roman women used to dilute it, drop it in the eyes, it would make the pupils dilate. They thought that made them look pretty, and so they used it as well. But it was also used as a poison on poison-tipped arrows. And this goes back to what Paracelsus was telling us. Toxicity depends on the chemical, but it also depends on the amount, the level of exposure. And let's define a couple of terms here. Toxicity, what is that? That's an inherent property of all substances. That refers to the actual chemical. Hazard is the capacity to produce an adverse effect. But most important is risk. And risk is the probability of exposure and the likely outcome. And that is what needs to be really understood when we talk about potentially hazardous chemicals, especially in a tannery environment where it's not just bactericides and fungicides, but a lot of other chemicals we use that are potentially hazardous. Risk assessment, there's a couple of, and I'm not a toxicologist, but because of the type of products we sell, I've had to become familiar with some of the basic concepts. So let's go through them. And this is what Paracelsus was trying to tell us. And this is what those very expensive tests, 3 to 4 million euros, sorry, for a fungicide, what they try to calculate is the dose response curve. For every chemical, there is a level at which it's non-toxic. And that we call the no observable adverse effect level. Above that level, however, all chemicals will start showing some level of adverse effect to the point where they can become toxic. And even, and I don't want to be trivial here, but even oxygen can kill you. Water can kill you. If there's too much, if it's the only thing you're breathing in is oxygen, or the only thing you're drinking is water, then excessive amounts, it can kill you too. So dose response is a critical concept. Duration is important too. How long of a time period are you exposed to a chemical? And timing. Is it in the embryonic stage, the youth, or the adult phase? And then, of course, route of exposure. For typical chemistry hazardous chemicals, there's potential exposure through the skin, through inhalation, or gavage, through the mouth. And then, of course, we have to pay attention to land, air, and water release as well. But again, the level of risk is not just the potency or the inherent toxicity of the agent, but it's the amount to which you're exposed, which is key. Now, I won't go through this. Again, I'm not a toxicologist, but this again indicates the type of testing and procedures that are encompassed in a dossier of information on a particular active, which then is studied by a toxicologist, typically over a 2-3 year period, before making a decision on what can be used, how much of it can be used, and under what conditions. So when we've talked about basic concepts, the process. What about management of risk? And this is where the regulations come in. Governments, I've got competent in inverted commas, sometimes difficult to think of governments as competent, but in this case, they are. They employ knowledgeable people, toxicologists. They have a defined process, predictable outcome, and this ends up being laws, and we have to follow those laws. And those can include regulations on use and presence of chemicals in articles. And examples of the types of government organization bodies we're talking about is European Chemical Agency in the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency, and then national laws like the German BFR, California Proposition 65, and then various consumer product safety agencies. Let's contrast this, however, with what I'll call non-government organizations, which put together restricted substances lists. This can be industry commerce, it can be retailers, brands, eco-labels, testing houses, and this mostly relates to presence of chemicals in articles. And it's my perception that these organizations have good intentions, but little uncertain whether the process is all that well defined. And sometimes it's a little secretive, and we know the RSL lists keep changing. Now these brands retailers say, well, this is voluntary, you don't have to comply. But in a very long, complex supply chain like we have in the leather industry, you have to comply if you want to compete in the marketplace. And unfortunately, these lists sometimes seem a little competitive for dubious reasons and open to interference. And who are we talking about? Shoe brands, retailers, eco-labels, industry organizations, they all have their lists. Now coming back to the BPR regulations, let's talk about different types of fungicide, bactericide within the context of regulation, restriction, and assessment of risk, what Paracelsus was trying to tell us. Bactericides are really used early on in process. They're typically water-soluble, they're washed out of leather, and they biodegrade fairly quickly in an effluent treatment plant. They are not carried over into the finished leather, so they're really not much of a concern for consumers. There is some discussion about bactericide carryover into collagen for the food industry. But we have data, we have worked with individual tanneries, and all the processes are different, and we can prove that the bactericide is not in the collagen when it's processed into the food chain. And based on that, we have some permission from some food authorities to be able to continue using bactericides. Now, fungicides are a little different because they are designed to stay with the leather, and the active substance limits are on some NGO RSLs. And from my view, some of these lists have levels that are below practical use for the global leather industry. And tanners are different. You can make leathers without use of fungicide if you bring it to the dry stage very quickly. But if you're exporting wet glue, you do need to use sufficient amount. And some of these RSL lists, the levels are too low, and you might give a false sense of benefit for society. A couple of points to this. Fungicides are expensive in dollar, euro, whatever it is per kilo, and tanners are not going to use excessive amounts. They use what they need for their requirements. Another point is the way that they put limits is so many part per million or milligrams per kilogram, and extracting a fungicide with sonication and solvent is not representative of potential risk of exposure. It's not whether it's there or not, it's how much you're exposed to that determines risk. Leather fibers have an extraordinary large surface area, and they adsorb or combine fungicides, and I'm using TCMTB as an example here very well. In addition, we have data which shows that if you can take leather, you can rub it, whether it's crust, whether it's finished leather, wet, dry, synthetic sweat, there is no detectable transfer. So if there's no exposure, there's no risk. It's the same with inhalation. TCMTB is essentially non-volatile, and tests indicate that in a month-long environmental tests, there is no TCMTB that comes off which is of any level of concern. Fungicides cannot be compared by only reviewing toxicological endpoints. These are the R phrases. And it's my concern that this is sometimes done by these people who put RSL lists together, or best available technique, or whitelist considerations. This does not constitute a risk assessment. And again, Paracelsus, 500 years ago, says we should look at the dose and not just the inherent potency of the active substance. So to wrap up the main conclusions, it appears that all commonly used bactericides and fungicides are being supported under BPR. They'll continue to be available for the leather industry. That's good news. After September 2013, leathers in the European Union and leathers that are imported as articles will need to be treated with biocides which are on the list. And globally, I think they are already in compliance, because what is notified is pretty much what's used worldwide. And that would be either under existing nominative EU list or the transitional measures of the BPR. Now, it's likely after September 2013 we will have to, or articles coming into Europe will have to be labeled. But as Ralph has indicated, that is still under discussion, and we're waiting for interpretation of what some of the terminology means to determine what needs to be on that label. Another point which I'd like to bring to the table here is that I think the leather industry should work together with suppliers who are supporting biocides under the BPR, and I think there's nothing wrong, and I don't want to put too harsh a term here, but to push back against some of these unreasonable limits which our industry is being placed upon. It's not the risk phrase, it's the risk assessment which needs to be considered when we talk about these things. There will be a reduced number of biocide actives available, as well as suppliers. So it's important that as a tanner you speak to your supplier, make sure that your supply line will be uninterrupted. There will most likely be an impact on pricing, but I can assure you that it will remain a competitive market. So what will happen we don't know, but I don't think that it will be too unreasonable. So the message is, don't panic. Support your local supplier of biocides who's supporting the active under the unfolding regulations, and let's work together as an industry to see what we can do to make sure we have continued access to the chemicals we need to make leather. Thank you very much for your attention.
Elton, the TCMTB, when you raise the pH at neutralisation, does it break down the TCMTB or does it stay within the leather?
Good question. TCMTB is stable to about 8.5 pH 9, and beyond that it will degrade reasonably rapidly. But the pHs in which TCMTB is applied and which the leather is typically exposed to are well within stability range. If you have any questions on the specific process that you have, we'd be happy to run a test.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bird.
Yeah, just picking up on your last point regarding the enormous number of lists that we seem to be seeing on an annual basis new lists of prohibited or restricted substances. And one of your last comments was this pushback element. I presume that you refer to yourselves in this respect. You must sit on various boards, various bodies for consultation. How easy is it, or how difficult is it for you as a company to ensure that your products are represented in a good light, and that the likes of TCMP and TCMTV is not likely to appear on these lists in the future?
Very good question, and I think I'm going to give two answers for you. A lot of the data that companies have, and I'm talking here, I believe, for other basic chemical suppliers, manufacturers of these chemicals as well, they have a lot of data about their chemistries. However, you saw the cost of this data. It's not public data. We use that data in support of our registrations. And I can give you a number of examples where, for example, an OEM in the automotive manufacture, I have examples of a shoe supplier who maybe looked at a risk phrase and said, oh no, we don't want TCMTB in our leather. They've told the tanner has contacted Buckman, and it usually comes to my desk, and we say, okay, let's sit down, the tanner, the OEM or